Let's start with Gaza. Overnight, we're hearing of more killings. At least 37 people have been killed in a series of Israeli strikes in Gaza, many in areas where displaced civilians are living in tents. These are figures, we have to say, coming from the Hamas-run civil defence and their health ministry. Israel will always say that they try to keep civilian life to a minimum, but we know now, over the last 6 weeks, there has been no aid going into Gaza, that there have been a number of attacks. We've all heard about the paramedics who were attacked and buried in shallow graves. There seems to be, I feel, a tide turning. I mean, 12 aid agencies, and agencies we all know, Oxfam, ActionAid, Christian Aid, Islamic Relief, War Child, have all come together to sign a letter that this is enough, and that even their staff are now under threat. What is going on here, and at what point do the UK government join in on this sort of feeling now that really something needs to be done about perhaps Netanyahu? We're not pointing at all of Israel at all, probably not even all of the government, but Netanyahu himself.
Well, as we know, a ceasefire plan was agreed, and part of that in the first phase was that in return for the hostages that were taken when there was the assault by Hamas, well, it's well over a year ago now, isn't it, were taken in exchange for Palestinians detained in Israel. And that process started, I think it was about 33 hostages for about 1,900 Palestinians detained were exchanged. That was meant to lead to a second stage, but it hasn't really happened, and there's a number of reasons for that. One is on the Israeli side. There was a part of the agreement to go to the next phase, that there'd be a phased withdrawal, I understand, of Israeli troops. That didn't happen. And the other side of it, of course, is Hamas being prepared to say that it will disarm itself, and that's not going to happen. So we've got this standoff. But in the middle of all this, obviously, there are hostages still being held, but also there are civilians coming under quite serious attack, brutal attack. And you mentioned the people camped in tents. These are people displaced from parts of Gaza who actually were told to go to this area. And basically, their tents have been set alight, they have died.
Médecins Sans Frontières, you know, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, have called Gaza now a mass grave. I mean, these are sort of really quite dystopian images we're seeing, really quite horrific images. I mean, I've been listening to your show on LBC, and you've had, you know, a real moment recently where you had a lawyer on who you cut off, and, you know, you've been really quite outspoken about this.
I've gone from being apparently the most pro-Israeli broadcaster on British media to a Hamas lover over 24 hours because of that interview. Yeah,
but do you feel that there's a shift? Have you felt a shift in sort of general feeling out there, and actually that enough is enough, well, to an extent?
In any argument, there are two extremes. And if you're on the extreme on both sides, you haven't changed your view whatsoever. Your side is 100% in the right, and the other side is 100% in the wrong. Most people are somewhere in the middle. Most people can see the Israeli position about the hostages, etc. But I think a lot of people are becoming, should we say, uncomfortable. That's probably the wrong word, but uncomfortable about a lot of the actions of the Israeli government. They still support Israel, they still support the Israeli cause, but you can't defend the level of devastation that we've seen, because when the Israelis say, well, we're doing our best to target, well, you look at the devastating scenes and you think, well, that is not...
They're not very good at it.
This latest strike, so 5 children were killed, and it's in areas where displaced civilians are living, and Israelis are saying that they're blaming the deaths on Hamas because they're saying that they're operating in residential areas.
Which is true.
Yeah, but, you know, at the end of the day, it's these children are losing their lives, aren't they? So what's the way through to try and resolve this?
Well, the way through is for Hamas to release the hostages. I think there was 59 hostages still in captivity. Many of them are actually dead, it has to be said. But if they were released, this would come to an end.
But it's interesting, isn't it? A letter that came out just a few days ago by 36 members of the Jewish Board of Deputies, they talked about that, and they made the interesting point, actually, that hostages have been released through dialogue and diplomacy and negotiation, not through military action like this. And I thought actually that letter was quite a moment, really. I don't think we've ever seen that from a sizable number of Jewish people come out. I mean, there's been a counter letter now by the president of the Jewish Board of Deputies, who has said it doesn't represent all of the Jewish community. But I think what that signifies is that, and often as a Muslim myself, I often feel like, oh my God, I feel like I'm a Muslim, that therefore I'm expected to be on Hamas's side. But it's not. It's neither a Jewish or a Muslim issue.
No.
It's a humanitarian issue, and it actually it gave me sort of. It really touched my heart, actually, seeing the Jewish community come out and go, actually, this proves that this is not about Jews and Muslims. This is about humanitarian life. And
I think, as Iain was implying, in no way is this at all accepting what happened when those attacks were made into Israel, people killed and hostages taken. But I think what has always been, I think, for some of us uncomfortable in this, to say the least, is we know Hamas is a terrorist organisation. We know it probably runs through a certain amount of control and fear their influence in the areas of Gaza that they cover. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be very happy if I was there as a Palestinian Muslim standing up to Hamas and having an alternative point of view. They're not a democracy. Israel is a democracy. It operates, apparently, in a rules-based system about humanitarian aid, because that's the other thing, since this whole ceasefire's broken down, as well as, obviously, what we've seen this week with this camped area being bombed, there's no aid supplies going back in, so we're going back. And that's what makes it uncomfortable, is we expect more of Israel.
Just factually, it is not true to say there are no aid supplies going in, but there aren't enough. That is absolutely true. And I mean, these aid agencies, I mean, they're not lying when they say that not enough is going through. And I think over time, the Israelis have always said, no, it's all getting through. There's enough, or at least enough getting through.
No, they say, but the aid agencies say
this is not
it's facing total collapse.
Well, I mean, there was a report I heard this week of a doctor, these are the doctors that are out there saving lives, that he's surviving on granola bars. Anyway, look, the questions we need to put is to the government. They're not available today, being Good Friday, but I think the question is, where is the line for the UK government on this? At what point do they say enough is enough?
Well, I think, the UK government, should be obviously calling out where they can, where some of this activity is just doing nothing to secure the hostages back or for peace. But fundamentally, it's behind the scenes, the Qataris, the US and the Egyptians who are at the centre of the negotiations that are happening.
OK, well, talking of ceasefires, we're also keeping an eye on the situation with Ukraine and Russia, hoping that will be resolved as well. We know that Ukraine's government's announced the signing of an outline minerals deal, haven't they? It's expected to be fully signed off next week. Involves reconstruction fund as well as part of it. I mean, Iain, how key is this? Because presumably once this deal is signed, then the US then have like a stake, don't they, in keeping Ukraine safe. Is this going to be the key to sort of resolving the whole situation, do you think?
It's very difficult to see how it will, because yesterday Donald Trump made some pretty abusive comments about Zelensky again, not condemning Putin in any way. You wonder what his agenda is here, because Russia is the block to a peace deal, and yet Donald Trump doesn't seem to recognise that, seems to give Putin a free pass on all of this. And it's bewildering to anyone who's followed the course of this conflict, where he's almost implying the Ukrainians started it. Well, it wasn't Ukraine invading Russia, it was Russia invading Ukraine. So, I mean, you're right to say America would have a bigger stake, and maybe that will push Trump to hold Putin to account, but I'm not holding my breath.
The interesting thing about it, is that if they do get this deal, and therefore the US have access to mineral activities in Ukraine, it will mean probably there'll be American companies and American workers on the ground there. Now, I agree with what you're saying, Iain, but actually just by the fact of having those people there, it puts Trump in a position where what is he going to do in terms of protecting those people, those American workers, those American companies, obviously looking to capitalise on this deal with access to the minerals?
A lot of these minerals are actually in the Donbass, which is controlled by Russia. Well, so, I mean, again, you think, well, how does that work?
Yeah.
Well, exactly. Well,
we'll wait to see the details.
We don't know the details
of that.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump has said there's a suggested date for September for his state visit. He said the US president, he said he was a friend of Charles, had great respect for him. When he was asked what kind of grand state visit it will be, this is the line which I think is so telling about Trump. He said he did not know, quote, know how it can be bigger than the last one, but they say it's going to be even more important.
Wow.
I mean, bigger. It's going to be bigger than the last one.
Everything always is with him, isn't it? You can look at this two ways. There will be many of your viewers who'll be thinking, how this is outrageous that we should be having Donald Trump to this country. But let's look at it from the other side for a moment. And I'm not a fan of Trump whatsoever. But with people like Trump, you have to appeal to his narcissistic side. There is no other side to him. So imagine this scenario. Over the next, what is it, 6 months away now, September? Over the next 6 months, British and American negotiators hatch up a peace deal. No, sorry, that's wrong. Trade deal.
Trade deal. What do we know?
Whereby our tariffs are cut from 10%, ideally to zero, but maybe probably not wholly zero. And we get more access to American markets. They get more access to us. We have to concede on one or two things like the digital services tax, maybe one or two agricultural products.
Well, hopefully not chlorinated chicken.
Well, why are people so obsessed with chlorinated chicken? We aren't going to be forced to eat it,
But I think
Charlotte.
people are worried about dropping in standards, aren't they? Animal welfare and...
Have you ever eaten chicken in America?
Yes.
It's very tasty, isn't it? So, I mean, anyway, let's not get obsessed by that. But can you imagine Donald Trump emerging from Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle announcing this trade deal? I mean, that would be marvellous for Keir Starmer. What a coup for him diplomatically.
And it could be key, couldn't it, actually, this whole idea of soft power.
Yeah, and it works.
The fact is, we are giving a state visit to a leader of a country who is currently deporting migrants, asylum seekers, arresting students.
So are we. So are we.
Deporting students.
So are we, actually.
But what, arresting...
Students overstay their visa, they are being deported.
In the way that's happening in America.
Well, maybe not in the way.
Not in the way. I mean, the videos that are appearing online of people being beaten up and then, forcibly being removed, that is not the kind of... You'd put it through a court system.
But think of the number of dictators.
You put it through a legal...
I mean, remember, America is a democracy. Think of the number of dictators that have had state visits. Remember, well, we're all probably too young to remember, but Ceausescu... not only did he come on a state visit to Buckingham Palace, Giscard d'Estaing, the then French president, warned the Queen that he would steal things from the palace, and he did.
OK. Well, we'll see.
I don't think Trump will do that.
Are you suggesting they have to lock down all the treasures when
Trump
I'm not suggesting that.
Listen, we must move on to other things. And something else, obviously, of significance that happened yesterday was this ruling by the Supreme Court, wasn't it? That the term woman can only be applied to biological females. And there's been, a lot of sort of examination of this, a lot of comment on this. And then I think, the assessment of what this means in practical terms. The newspaper's picking up on this today. The Daily Mail is talking about Labour turmoil on trans ruling. The party faces pressure to rip up gender laws. Ministers are still in a muddle on protecting women-only spaces, and The Times is talking about that third spaces could be needed for trans people. And, there's going to be a big period, isn't there, of working out what this means. We know a lot of organisations have been getting in touch with the Equalities Watchdog, just saying, how do we implement this? What does this mean? Do we need different toilets? Can trans people go into women's toilets? Do they need different wards? What does actually, in reality, it mean?
Well, the ruling has clarified a situation, and the ruling is basically on the Equality Act, and there are 9 protected characteristics within that, one of which is sex, another is actually gender reassignment, and then there's race and faith and other things as well that make up the 9. And what it's clearly said is that to be a woman, you have to be a biological woman, and sex means a biological woman. Now, that does have implications for protecting, as it was in the Equality Act, safe spaces for biological women. But at the same time, and, obviously there's a lot of noise, and there has been for some years over this issue, and I get that. At the same time, gender reassignment is still a protected characteristic. So if you are a trans woman or a trans man, then in your workplace, if, for example, they said, we're sacking you because of that, that is against the law. So it's working through some of these situations about rights. And I suppose, at the heart of this is when you have different groups with competing arguments for their human rights.
Yes.
And how does
so
that
they've
fit
both got
in?
a right, and how do you make those work together?
And I have to say, I have been in buildings, commercial and non-commercial buildings, where, you know, the access to the toilets, for example, there's various options. Even here, I think there are various options. There are male, there are female, and then there are gender neutral. So we're going to have to work through this. But, you know, part of this has been a pretty toxic debate over the last few years. And to be honest, politicians, you know, Labour and others, not really looking in depth about the implications of what was led by Maria Miller, a Conservative MP, as chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, who basically said anyone could self-ID. And that has also caused issues here around people just self-IDing who, for all intents and purposes, look like, sound like a man, are going into spaces where women are worried about their own protection.
Are we ever going to find a real common solution to this, a ground to this? I mean, it feels like it's divides so many people that it almost feels impossible.
Well, it does, but I think part of the problem here is that our Supreme Court is not the final arbiter. In America, the Supreme Court decides everything. That's a final stage. Here, the Supreme Court can make a ruling, which it did today, the day before yesterday, just on a legal interpretation, which I think is actually very helpful for them to have done that. But, of course, it's for Parliament then to decide what to do next. So there will be a lot of lobbying that goes on for the government to change the law, maybe back to, effectively, what a lot of people thought it was. Now, Labour have got a very simple answer to that, to say, no, the Supreme Court has spoken, we are not going to change the law for the remainder of this Parliament. Now, that won't stop people lobbying and having their say, and nor should it. We're in a democracy. Why shouldn't they have their say? But I agree with Caroline. I think this is... It's a good decision in the sense that it does provide a lot more clarity than there was before.
In the meantime, though, changes are being made. We look at British Transport Police. They've changed their strip search policy now. They've been the first to confirm that they've made this change. An interim position, so trans people held in custody will be strip searched by an officer in line with their birth sex. So a trans woman in custody will be searched by a male officer.
The other side of that is, before, female police officers were being expected to strip search someone who said they were identified as a woman. And when you're doing a strip search, it's an intimate search. And that is another issue as those women police officers faced under their previous policy.
Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, sort of almost celebrating this moment and saying that she has reignited her feud with actor David Tennant. In an interview, she responded to criticism by the former Doctor who he previously talked about wanting to live in a world where she doesn't exist anymore because of her views. Let's take a look. This is on GB News.
But I spent my entire time as Equalities Minister really fighting on this issue. I even got abuse from David Tennant, you might remember.
Do you have a message for the former Doctor Who star, David Tennant?
I was right. And actually, what is now really clear is that the law explains something that all children know. Men are men and women are women.
It was quite reasonable, wasn't it? I don't see that reigniting a feud. She stated a fact. She was right.
Yeah. But I feel, is she sort of gloating a little bit in this?
No, she answered the question.
I thought she was pretty matter-of-fact there. And you know, I enjoy watching David Tennant act and what he appears in.
That's good to know.
I don't.
You know, Broadchurch, Doctor Who, not bad, I would say. But I think the other thing is he was literally playing to the crowd on that occasion. And what he did say is that, following on from what you quoted, Adil, that she should just shut up. And now that has been part of the problem in this whole debate over the last few years. The suppression of discussion in a reasonable way that recognises both the concerns of trans people in terms of how they are treated in the workplace, how they face a harassment, and also recognising for biological women their concerns about their safe spaces, the issues around sport as well. The lack of a reasonable debate has just been toxic.
And can you imagine if a right-wing politician stood up on a public platform like David Tennant did and said, I wish Diane Abbott didn't exist? I mean, the backlash from that. And yet people think for David Tennant to say that about a black woman is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah.
Let's look at what's happening in our schools at the moment, because we've got this survey this morning. The Teachers' Union, NASUWT, have released this. It's pupil behaviour in school. 20% of teachers have been hit or punched by pupils. And the age thing, I just think, is staggering, isn't it? 60% of threats of assault with a weapon come from pupils of primary school age. I mean, what's going on when teachers can't even do their job without fear of violence from pupils?
I mean, look, I know every parent's in a different state, but honestly, if that happened as a parent, my child, I would be absolutely mortified. And, you know, often, you know, our kids don't behave well. And, you know, I've sat there sometimes where, you know, I've had to hear something, you know, that's happened. And to be honest, you know, I've listened and reasoned. But if my child's in the wrong, then as a parent, I take responsibility for that.
So you think it's parenting?
I think there is something going on here around... There's a difference between, you know, we used to have a thing, we had to have be deferential to everybody in authority, and you weren't heard. But I think where we're going in some respects, and this is reflected in some of these figures, is what is happening within families. Is it also an expression of that violence, a problem in that family, or is it actually parents who are not actually understanding their responsibility? And you hear this with WhatsApp groups, social media, awful things said about teachers in schools.
The union said that they estimate as many as 30,000 violent incidents against teachers involving pupils with a weapon in the last 12 months. 30,000?
Yeah.
I mean, that is just... I mean, you know, I remember my school days. If you ever got into any bit of trouble, I mean, I was so scared of the teacher, but I was scared of, like, oh, my God, they're going to tell my parents if I do anything.
Exactly.
I was scared what my parents would absolutely...
But kids nowadays, the first reaction is, well, I know my rights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the parents don't know their responsibilities. That is the problem. One of my best friends is a male primary school teacher, and there aren't many of them to the pound nowadays. And, I mean, the stories that he tells me every time I see him about being attacked, physically attacked, by a 6 or 7-year-old.
I know, it's shocking, isn't it?
I'm sorry, that did not happen.
No.
Or if it did, it was an extreme rarity back in the day. And I know whenever you say that, as someone of my age, you sound like an old git, but it is true. You think, well, what has happened to society in the meantime? And he tells me that invariably, when the parents are told about this, the parents blame the teacher for provoking the child in some way, as if.
We must, just before we go, quickly mention this WhatsApp situation with Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, who accidentally set up rather a large WhatsApp group, didn't he, to send out a message to promote his London Marathon. And Iain, you were added to that.
I was added to it.
So what happened?
Well, I just sort of saw this notification, Robert Jenrick has deleted you.
Oh.
And I wasn't hugely surprised. I wrote rather a disobliging article recently about Robert Jenrick.
So You've been cancelled.
So then I clicked on it, and it was actually a WhatsApp group that he'd formed to ask people to donate to his London Marathon effort, because as you know, he's lost a lot of weight, he's become very fit, he's running the London Marathon. And
he's running for leader.
Surely not.
Has he been taking that pill?
I would have happily donated to it, but and I kept seeing so-and-so's been deleted, so-and-so's been deleted. So I'm not quite...
So the issue with this is that he shared everybody's numbers, isn't it? So when you set up a group like that, he accidentally then shares lots of people's numbers with other people.
Who I think you had on the programme recently, she's got a new book coming out in June. So she set up a WhatsApp group to invite people to her book launch, of which I was on that too.
Ooh,
and of course, you look
all the famous
you look at there's about 80 people on
all the
this,
A-listers,
and they're all quite a lot of them are major league celebrities.
Yeah.
And I've got their numbers.
I think he was trying to send a broadcast message where you can send out a message to lots of your people on WhatsApp without them knowing who else is being sent to. But he accidentally...
It's dangerous, isn't it?
I'm not going anywhere near that.
If you're not across all of this technology and how it works, it's very dangerous. Thank you both very much. We will see you later.